The NHL is a fascinating example of how brilliant minds can bend the game so badly that they have to single-handedly invent new rules just to stop those players from manipulating the game. Because when you have hockey players playing in the #1 league at the highest level, they are bound to find loopholes or perhaps tactics that are, technically legal, but shouldn't be at all. However, sometimes it's also unintentional, like Yoni Pekanen's career-ending icing. Or intentional like Rob Ray, which is probably my favorite rule change of all time, as they would have to ban him from taking off his shirt and/or jersey because my man would literally lube himself up to gain an advantage in fights because they couldn't grab him like the Grease Man and Family Guy.
You're never gonna catch me.
So today's video, we're gonna go over NHL players who forced rule changes in the NHL. Also, I have 3 parts to this series. This is probably one of my favorite, series I've ever done on this channel. So if you haven't seen them or haven't watched them in a while, go watch them. I'll link them down below. And make sure to press subscribe for your weekly dose of hockey content. Since the dawn of time, the most despised play not only in hockey, but all sports is easily diving. Embellishment, especially in hockey. Why, you ask? Well, hockey is a gladiator sport. We fight, we hit. Even the general managers are juiced up. No, but for real, diving is a pathetic strategy that has been used by many players over the years in order to draw a penalty and go on a power play. But sometimes it looks like this.
Chaput swings and it rides up the hands of Jake Muzzin. One hand on the stick.
Really, Muzzin? Really? Now, to be fair, this was probably a reflex, but he also checked if his teeth were missing, which is just hilarious. But some other plays are like this one. Absolutely absurd. Now, what is ironic about that last clip is the fact that PK Subban single-handedly created a brand new rule involving diving and embellishment. Because I kid you not, from 2010 until current day, PK Subban leads the entire NHL in diving penalties. And who knows how many more he should have received. It is so bad, PK Subban has his own highlight mixtape just for diving.
Trying to release here. He's trying to get back into the play because the puck's free, and this is just an absolute joke.
The expression on his face tells you everything. I'm a 5-year-old kid who's about to do something that's known as misbehaving.
Also, I do want to mention that I actually love PK Subban, and it feels like I kind of rag on PK a lot on this channel. But come on, the dude is a character and he knows it. But here's the thing, the speed of the game is incredibly fast. Therefore, it is easy to understand how a ref might perceive something as a penalty when in fact it was a dive. And around the year 2013, players were getting pissed, especially with modern technology that can go back, zoom in, and clearly point out it was a complete dive and not in fact a penalty. And because the league wasn't doing enough, a group of players declared that they were going to draft up a list of the biggest diving culprits and circulate around the entire league to hopefully create enough embarrassment that they would stop. And who's on the top of that list? Well, according to reputation and the fact that he has the most diving penalties of the last decade, it was my man, PK Subban. However, from the league's perspective, curbing the diving penalty was a predicament. How do you penalize something you can't see in real time? Well, the NHL would decide to take the public embarrassment route, as they would introduce a brand new rule that if a player repeatedly dives, even if it isn't caught in-game, they can go back and watch the game film and hand out fines. $2,000 for the second infraction, $3,000 the next time, with a max of $5,000 per dive. But that's not really the point, that's just kind of pocket change to the NHL players. But the real dagger is the fact that there's a press release, which basically puts that player on blast to the entire hockey community, aka millions of people, players, and fans, to hopefully cause so much embarrassment that it stops the act of diving completely. And the fact that they've now had the power to go back and assign fines has been huge to stop the epidemic of diving. But I'd like your opinion. Who in the NHL is the worst diver? Comment down below. The Calder Trophy, aka Rookie of the Year. Recently, there's been a lot of commotion involving this prestigious award. In 2016, a 24-year-old Artemi Panarin with 7 years of KHL experience would beat out an 18-year-old Connor McDavid for Calder. Or even last year, Kirill the Thrill Kaprizov winning the Calder at age 24 with 6 years of KHL experience, beating out a 21-year-old Jason Robertson with 60 games of AHL experience. Even this year, as we have a 25-year-old Alex Nedeljkovic, who placed third in Calder voting last season, except he's still eligible for the Calder this season. So would it be fair if he won it over a goalie with no games of NHL experience? I don't know. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the players I just mentioned didn't or don't deserve the Calder based on their play and production, but the question is, if McDavid Wen played in the KHL for 7 years and joined the NHL at age 24, you'd be out of your mind if you thought he wouldn't have won the Calder, let alone the scoring championship. And back in the 90s, this rule was far more absurd. That is, there wasn't a rule at all. And in the 1989-1990 season, and get this, a 31-year-old Sergei Markov with 13 years of KHL experience. At the age of 31, Markov would beat a 19-year-old Mike Modano who had 11 less points, and a 20-year-old Jeremy Roenick. Now, keep in mind during this time frame, Russian players weren't commonly entering the league, and so technically, he should count, right? Well, he did count, and he also won the Calder. And keep in mind, this transpired during the Cold War. The tension between the Soviet Union, or Russia, and America was at an all-time high, and a 31-year-old Russian who played in the Soviet Union with 13 years of professional experience would take down the next generational American phenom in Mike Modano, which is even more confusing when you consider that Gretzky wasn't eligible because he played games in the WJ. And as you would expect, this would single-handedly create so much backlash that the NHL would have to invent a brand new rule, and the same rule we have today, that a player must be 25 or under to win the Calder, which in my opinion still seems a little high, especially with the young talent we are seeing today dominating at the age of 18. So personally, I think they should make another rule change for about 23, maybe 24. Penalty boxes. In today's game, you take a penalty, you sit in a penalty box adjacent to your bench's side. If you get into a fight, both players sit in separate boxes adjacent to the side of their bench. Makes complete sense, right? Well, to be honest, it's just common sense at this point. Because could you imagine if someone like Ryan Reeves and Evander Kane shared a penalty box right after they got into a fight? All hell would break loose. Except, and I kid you not, back in the 60s, opposing teams would share the same penalty box. Absolutely absurd, as they would go from pounding each other's faces in to basically sitting on each other's laps. And as you'd expect, this was a complete gong show. And in one game, well, it went to an all new level. As Paulford and Harper would get into a fight during the game, they'd be escorted to the single penalty box. And of course, it was only time a massive fight would break loose. Both players absolutely giving it to each other. And this event was so bad, the Toronto Maple Leafs and the NHL were like, okay, yep, we definitely need two separate penalty boxes. Back in the early 2010s, concussions and head injuries were becoming a massive issue. And what's crazy, it's not necessarily that there were more concussions, rather, concussion research was becoming far more prevalent in the sports world. And honestly, just thinking about it today, it is crazy that I grew up in an era where concussions weren't even taken seriously. It seems like a no-brainer today, but for 90% of the entire hockey timeline, concussions weren't even recognized. Even though we have seen many career-ending concussions due to suspect hits. Most notably, Scott Stevens hitting Paul Kariya.
He moves it. Oh, guys, that's interference.
During the late 2000s and the early 2010s, with the introduction of the next generational player in Sidney Crosby, the speed of the NHL game got exponentially faster. And yes, the boomers will say you just have to quote-unquote just keep your head up. But in some cases, it's the inevitable. And in 2011, during a Winter Classic game, this would happen.
Crosby and get hit.
Oh yeah. Ever.
After a puck would fly by and just miss Crosby, he would keep his momentum skating forward and turn his head to follow the puck. David Steckel, and I'll get your guys' opinion on this, would accidentally or purposely shoulder Crosby directly in the head, resulting in one of the worst reported concussions in NHL history. As Crosby, who was on pace for a 132-point season, would miss 41 games or half a season due to a horrendous concussion that nearly had dire consequences on his entire career. And keep in mind, this was a 23-year-old Crosby who was making millions of dollars for the league. And Crosby, as you would expect, was extremely frustrated. Not even necessarily from this play, but the fact that there was next to no rules to protect players from getting a career-ending hit. Thus, he would speak out against the NHL. And keep in mind, again, during this time, it was complete taboo to talk about concussions. As most would say, well, keep your head up. But in many scenarios, specifically this one, how is Crosby, who doesn't have a puck on a stick, who's trying to track the puck, supposed to know that a 6'6" mutant was about to take his head off? Thus, the NHL would introduce an update, Rule 48, which now penalizes players for making any head contact, which can also lead to major penalties and or suspensions. But it is just wild that it took Sidney Crosby speaking out for this to happen. Now, is it because without Crosby's presence, the league would lose tens of millions in revenue? Possibly, but I would say it more has to do with the fact that concussion research was still very new. And during this time frame, many leagues around the world were still playing catch up, and they still are. But I'm just very glad that concussions and head injuries have become a focal point in player safety in hockey or any other sport in the world, as this rule change wouldn't be just introduced to the NHL, because Hockey Canada, the IIHF, among many other leagues, would instantly follow suit, penalizing headshots to hopefully end head injuries in hockey. And also, this is a PSA, fighting rarely accounts for concussions. I believe there was a stat saying that it accounts for around 5%, as concussions usually happen as a result of the impact from receiving a hit or from hitting the ice. And I'm glad that many leagues around the world have recognized this crucial player safety item.